Hello, everybody. I am Florence Reiss Kraut, author of the new book, Street Corner Dreams. And with me is my niece, Justine Reiss, who is the audio narrator of both of my books, How to Make a Life and Street Corner Dreams. And she's here with me. She's going to interview me and she is going to read something from Street Corner Dreams so that you can hear if you're one of those people who likes to listen to audio books while you are traveling on, to work or taking a run. You'll hear her wonderful narration with all of the great people that are in the book, populate the book. So first, I want to thank the wonderful Renee, who has created this site, which is all about respect and love for books and readers.
Thanks, Renee. I see you in there. We see that you're there.
And I am so happy that she gave me this opportunity to tell you about my brand new book, Street Corner Dreams.
Yes.
And the second thing is that, the second thing I want to tell you is that we are going to talk about the book. Justine's going to ask me questions. If you have questions in the chat, you put them in the chat and we'll answer them. Somewhere in the middle of the time that we're together, we're going to ask you a question or two, and you can put the answers in the chat. And at the end of our session, Renee's going to pick four lucky winners, because I'm going to give two copies away of How to Make a Life and two copies of Street Corner Dreams. And she will pick the winners and I will mail you the books.
And just for fun, I just put in the chat the link directly to Amazon to buy the book or buy the Audible or
the ebook.
You get options now.
Right. So we're going to start with the interview.
Okay.
And then we're going to go on.
Great. So, Florence,
Yes.
it was 3 years ago, which was an interesting time, 2020, when you launched your book, How to Make a Life. And I was with you at that point. And it is an immigrant story. It's another family saga. It takes place over 100 years. And your second novel, which we are launching now, Street Corner Dreams, is another immigrant family. So one that gets involved with gangsters in Brooklyn. And I have to say, even I, having known you, was a little surprised by the subject matter, also a little bit excited because I have kids, they are fans of Sopranos and whatnot. So how did you become interested in a gangster story?
Very interesting. So I grew up in this very large immigrant family. And when I was growing up, I would be in the kitchen with all of my 26 aunts. Well, I had, let's say, 13 aunts, and they would swing in and out of the kitchen, and they would tell stories, and I would sit there with my cousins, and we would listen to these stories. And I always swore that I would write a book about family and these very interesting stories. And I thought I knew every story that there was to know about my family. So when How to Make a Life was out for about a year, and I was going around doing book talks and so on, I hadn't yet started my second novel. That was about in 1921. I got a telephone call from my daughter, who is very interested in ancestry. And she has done a lot of research on our very large family.
Mm-hmm.
And she's found things that we never knew about.
Hmm.
So she called me up and she said, Mom, you're not going to believe this, but your mother had a first cousin who was a member of Murder Incorporated, which was a nefarious gang in the 1920s and 30s. She said, and he was murdered in a gang war in 1930. She said, "Did you know about that?" I said, "I never heard that story. Never." I was shocked because I thought I knew every story in the family.
Right.
She said, "Not only that, but when his family, and by the way, I knew his mother and father. I had met them. They were quite old when I met them, but I knew them. And when they found out that their son had was murdered and was buried in a pauper's grave, the mother disowned him, and the father went to, it happened in the Catskills, went up and disinterred his son from this pauper's grave, brought him to Brooklyn, and buried him in a Jewish cemetery, and then sat shiva for him. And she said, "Can you imagine what went on in that family's house with the mother and the father at so odds?"
Oh, yeah.
And I started thinking about that and doing what writers do, which is go, what if, and how about if this happened? And I didn't want to write his story. I did not want it to be biographical, but I did start thinking about an immigrant family that came in around 1914, and how I could weave something about the gangsters in it. And
Wow.
so that's how this story came to be. I had to do a lot of research, needless to say,
Yes.
because I didn't know very much
Yeah.
about
And
yeah,
it's
about
wonderful.
gangsters.
It's wonderful. For you guys are in for a treat to read this and listen to it. So, in essence, this is a book about immigrants.
Yes.
Woven in between this gangster story. It's about their arrivals and their struggles. So, expand a little bit more on that.
Yes. So it's very much an immigrant family, and an immigrant family story. Just like immigrants who come to this country today, the immigrants who came at the turn of the last century had the same kinds of problems. They don't speak the language. They don't have jobs. They usually have no money. They have come fleeing from something, and they are hungry to get their roots in this country, but it is not easy. They don't know the culture. So what do? They generally go to live in the area where people who come from their culture live. And they also go to, often will go, if they have relatives, they will go to the relatives and possibly even live with them for a little while. And they will go to an area where their people of their religion live. There's a church in the neighborhood that is similar to the church that they went to in their home country, or a synagogue. So in this book, we have the Golda who comes, and I'll tell you a little bit about her in a few minutes, and Ben, and this is exactly what they do. They have to make a life in a very alien culture, facing all kinds of troubles and conflicts, and of course, during the time of the early of the teens and the 20s and the 30s in New York, in the last century, was a very turbulent time, and we'll talk a little bit about what was going on then.
Yes. So basically, it sounds like they were building communities.
They were,
which is what we do now, and also that we longed for during COVID. And there's a little parallel about that, isn't there?
There is,
Yes.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So set up the opening for us a little bit.
Okay, so
Okay.
what we have Golda, who is an 18-year-old who comes with her younger sister, 17, and very pregnant. She has married, her sister Esther is married to Ben, who came to the United States before her, which was often the case, and sent back money for her to come. And she came while she was pregnant, and unfortunately, she went into labor on the ship. And she had a very difficult labor, and she died giving birth to her baby just 2 days before they arrived in the United States. And it was a horrible experience for Golda, of course, because this was her younger sister. She felt responsible for her, and she now took the baby off the ship and went to meet Ben, who did not obviously didn't know that this had happened. So she goes off the ship, and she does meet Ben, who is in shell shock when he finds out, naturally. And he has been living with his cousin Surah, and she has taken him in, so he does the only thing he can do, which is he takes Golder, his wife's sister, and his new baby, who he does not know what to do with, to his older cousin, and they go to her to seek help. So that is, that's the beginning of the book, and they are looking for the support and help that they need in order to establish themselves in this country.
Yeah.
So,
Would you like me to read a little?
No,
Oh,
no.
okay. We're not doing that yet. Okay.
no. That is not what we're reading now.
Okay, that's true.
So,
Oh, that's right. So immigrants get support from the community, as we mentioned before. That is where that advice in the community, building that, and that helps them survive. So I certainly was taken by the characters, and I got to bring them to life in a way that we collaborated on. So the characters of the rabbi and cousin Surah, which are those community builders that you're
Right.
referring to, talk about those characters a little bit.
So they come and they don't know, they have to get the body off the ship in order to bury it, and they have to have money to do that. And Ben has to figure out what is he going to do with this baby, because he has to work, and who's going to take care of the baby? And Golda, who has this dream that she is going to be an independent woman and make a life for herself in America that is different from the life that she was going to have if she had stayed in Europe. She doesn't know what to do either. And they go to, the rabbi helps them find a way to bury the body, and cousin Surah takes them in and is a very loving and wise woman. And this is where you will get to read.
Jump in the gun.
It's going to show you a little bit of how cousin Surah has given Golda some help and advice.
Okay. So one morning, when Golda was feeding Morty, cousin Surah said, "So, has Ben asked you yet?" "Asked me what?" "To marry." Golda's mouth dropped open in shock. "No, he hasn't." Her heart beat hard. She didn't want to marry Ben. He didn't love her. She didn't love him. She had never yearned to be a wife and a mother the way Esther had. But in the old country, what else was there? Here in this new country, she saw many women working on the avenue. She wanted to learn English and have a job so she could become an American. The baby stirred in her arms, and she looked down. But how could she desert this baby? Leave him? Cousin Surah had talked about an orphanage. How could she let her sister's son be taken to an orphanage if she could prevent it? "Do people really put babies in orphanages?" Golda whispered. "Yes, if they can't feed them. Better an orphanage than death by starving." Cousin Surah took Golda's hand. "People do desperate things when they see no way out. Men run away and leave their families when they can't feed them. Even mothers leave. There are more terrible stories in this building than I can talk about. Your story is not so desperate. You have choices." Golda nodded. All the choices came to her, and none, except one, seemed worthy of consideration. She knew that in the village, when a man was widowed with a child, he was expected to marry his dead wife's sister, if she was not married. It was a good deed for the sister to marry him and raise her sister's child. "You have choices," cousin Surah repeated, "but not so very many." Golda knew what cousin Surah was saying. She had no trade that made sense. All the dreams she'd had as a girl of escaping the life that was laid out before her was just that, dreams. Thoughts swirled in her head. Would Esther want me to marry Ben? Did she really tell me to take the baby when she lay dying on the ship? Is he going to ask me to marry? Yes. Well, he hasn't yet. Maybe he won't. He will, soon. And what will you say? Golda breathed in and out. If I say no, where will I go? Cousin Sura probably will not let me stay here. If I say yes, I will be married, and my life will no longer be my own. A deep sigh escaped her lips. If Ben asks me, I need an answer. She swallowed hard. There was only one answer that seemed to solve all the problems, and she would have to say it. Yes.
So you can see that we have set up a situation where Golda, the young woman who's come with dreams of an independent life, is now forced down another path, and she has to marry Ben, who was in love with her sister, who she doesn't love, and she knows he doesn't love her, and they're poor, but she doesn't really feel like she has a choice, and that is the real beginning of the book. It is 1914, as I said. We are going to go through the war, World War One, and Prohibition, and during World War One, there was very much like what we have had in the last 3 years and are still going through right now, which is a huge pandemic. They called it the Spanish flu, and millions of people around the world died. And so they have to live through that period. And then after World War One is the Great Depression, which was catastrophic for many people, including this family. And then, of course, that is the lead up to World War Two. So that's the period of time that this book takes place, and the many things that go on during that time that make this family really suffer and overcome the things that they suffer with. So, and I want to point out that one of the things that really appeals to me about immigrant stories is when I look around the United States, I know most of us come from all of us come from immigrant families, unless we happen to be Native Americans. But, how far back your immigration goes is sort of interesting. And people come here for many different reasons. So I'm very interested, and one of the things I'd like you to put in the chat is do you know when your family came here, where they came from, why they came? Were they fleeing for religious persecution, poverty? Was there a war that they were running away from? Were they trying to just reinvent themselves and make a new life? I'd be interested. And this will be, one of the things that maybe Renee will be choosing some of the winners for the giveaways.
And maybe you don't know. So put that in too if you have no idea where,
Right.
how
Good.
you got here. Because
Right.
maybe you weren't sitting in the kitchen with the ants like Aunt Florence was, or
Right.
me, actually, for that
Right.
matter. So I want to talk a little bit about the special relationships in this book, because there are so many of them, and the way that the stories are woven around these relationships. You've Ben and Golda. You have Golda and Morty, which is the son and the mother. You have Morty and Sylvia, they are brother and sister, and you have Morty and Anna, which is the love story. So you are so adept at portraying family dynamics. What do you do to understand this? I mean, I know obviously, well, I'm not obviously. You were a social worker,
Right.
and how much do you draw from that background in these relationships that you write about?
Well, yes, I'm a social worker. And social workers, of course, one of the things that people do when they go to a social worker is they tell their story. So I have just tons of stories that people have told me. And although I don't use them in any of my fiction, what I do use is my knowledge about family dynamics and how things that people do, choices they make, impact everybody in the family. And so what I say, I have a sort of a tagline for this book, which says that it's a family saga It's a love story. It's a gangster tale. It's
Yeah.
all three. So the family saga part of it is the how Ben and Golda and Sura and Morty and Sylvia, how they form a family over these years, and the love stories have to do with Ben and Golda because it's a non-love story to start with, and then as of course the years go on, they get they really have a it's a very interesting relationship that develops and grows because Golda is a very strong woman who does form an independent life for her, not an independent life, but she makes a good way for her to feel good about herself. And Ben tries, and he's a hard worker, but he's not the most the strongest man that you'd ever want to meet. And then we have their son Morty, who's brilliant and wants to get education and really get out of the ghetto. But during the Depression, he's got to make some hard choices. He has a friend, though, who wants to get out of the ghetto and takes the what was often called the easy way out, and that is that he joined some of the gangs. So those are some of the relationships. And we have Sylvia, the little sister, who uncovers a lot of family secrets. So that's another thing that I have learned. Most families do have secrets. I mean, my family had that secret that I didn't know anything about. And,
That's right.
so it's not unusual. That,
And in How to Make a Life, there's a lot of exposing of family
right.
secrets as well. So, all right, so back to this book, Street Corner Dreams, without too many spoilers. Can you tell us a little more about the main characters? And I'm thinking about Golda's frustration
Right.
as a woman with her American. Someone wrote here, I thought it was beautiful, the tug of war between European roots and American
Yes.
dreams. I think that's well said, Lisa. The way Morty and Rudy follow different dreams, that they are in the same atmosphere, but they're following different dreams. And Morty values education. Rudy is getting involved with the gangsters.
Right.
Right.
So what we have, as I said, this period of time, it's probably still going on now. But during this period of time, you have the people who come who want to make something of themselves. Golda has a dream, and it's an interesting irony. I'll just tell you that one of the reasons that she fled with her sister was that her father wanted her to marry a widower who had two children, who was quite a bit older than her, and she was really repelled by him. So she fled with her sister. And of course, the irony is, it was almost like her destiny. She comes to the United States and she has to marry a man who is a widower, and raise his son. So, and she has a struggle. She has a struggle with depression. She has a struggle with trying to love Morty, and loving him and then resenting him. So that's all part of it also. And then let's see, who else do we have? We have Rudy. Rudy is Morty's best friend. He's been his friend from kindergarten. And they take different paths because Rudy's not a good student and he does not want to go to school. And Morty wants to be an engineer. And so we have Rudy, who sees the gangsters on the street corners. And now I must tell you that at this time, there were gangsters on all the street corners. There were Italian gangsters, there were Jewish gangsters, there were Polish gangsters and Irish gangsters, and they all owned different street corners. And they ran, all the illegal activity. Prohibition had made it possible for organized crime to develop because people wanted alcohol and it was illegal. So that's what really formulated the gangs. And they made a lot of money. And they were very glamorous. They wore great clothes. They were hanging out on the street corners with beautiful women on their arms. And that's what attracted Rudy. He was Morty's best friend, but they went really different ways. And then we have Anna, who comes from an Italian family and has gangsters in her family. And by the way, just for the fun of it,
Yeah.
I wonder whether anybody out there in the audience has knows of any gangsters in their family. And if you do, drop it in the chat. We'd like to know, because I have found that often if you mention this, people will say, "Oh yeah, I heard about my mother's uncle who was a runner for the gang," or my this one was a chauffeur for a gangster. So just for the fun of it, if you do know of anyone, put it in the chat.
And you're willing to say.
And you're not too ashamed
Somebody
to
already
say.
put something about swimming with the fishes to make fresh gefilte fish. We've got some great stories in here.
I'll bet we do.
And it's fun when you start sort of tapping into those stories. It's wonderful. Yeah.
So anyway, Morty and his best friend go different ways. And I was saying about Anna, she comes from an Italian family, and some of them, not all, just like the Jewish families, there were some gangsters, and she's very, very much opposed to them, and that creates a bit of a conflict. In addition to the fact that Morty is Jewish and she is Italian Catholic, so that's another conflict.
Yes.
That we have.
Yes, and so it's a bit of a love story, Romeo and Juliet.
A little bit.
A little bit of that.
Yes.
So who got attracted or involved with gangsters? So we already asked that.
Right.
And anything in the background. There's also some other fun questions that are
right.
coming,
Why don't you
in
read
here.
them?
Okay, so there was something about the research that you did. You haven't necessarily talked too much about it.
Right.
Which also sprung me to just be curious, Florence, when you grew up in New York, do you remember seeing these guys hanging out on the street corners? Okay.
No, I'm too young for that.
Okay, she's too young for that. There you go. But tell us you did a lot of research.
Yes, I did.
Talk about it. Yeah.
So, yes, when my daughter told me about this, I said, well, I really have to find out about these gangs. The first thing I did was I looked up this cousin of my mother's, and I did find a historian in the Catskills who had actually written about how they found the body. And that was very interesting, and I had a conversation with him because the gangs in Brooklyn also went up to the Catskills. And they ran the protection racket, where they went around and got money from storekeepers for protection, and the protection was against the gangsters. So give me money so I don't burn down your store. I mean, basically that was it.
Right.
And they ran gambling and slot machines and prostitution. I mean, anything that was illegal that was in their purview. And my mother's cousin, went up to the Catskills and was up there, so that it wasn't just in Brooklyn; it was all over. And did you?
Yes, just I'll keep an eye on this, but people are popping in with their gangster stories.
Oh,
apparently there was
a couple of them.
There was one. Well, one of my cousins from the other side of our family is saying that we have a great grandfather. I think Carol, you have to tell me about that one. But yeah, so I think there's so many of my friends have told me. Your daughter is saying so many of her friends have mentioned that they things. I think once you open the floodgates,
yes.
these things start coming through. Yeah.
Right, and it is very, it is surprising. We get very, very surprised when we hear these things.
Yeah.
So what? Oh, research. So I found out about my mother's cousin, but in addition, I read books about. There was a book by Rich Cohen who wrote a book called Tough Jews. Mm-hmm. He wrote about all of the gangsters. That was a fabulous book. I read a book about called But He Was Good to His Mother, because it said, even though he was going around murdering people, he was very kind to his mother.
Right.
And I read a book about Bugsy Siegel, who was a very, very famous gangster. I did a lot of research on Wikipedia and found out all about how the gangs actually helped the in New York the police when during the run up to World War II, when there was a Nazi group here that they were trying to recruit people, and these gangsters got in and broke them up. So that was
Oh,
very
wow.
interesting. So there
Wow.
were lots of interesting stories.
Yeah.
It gave me a sense of the background.
Uh-huh.
I also had to do research on the Spanish flu
Right.
because that impacts the family, and I won't give away how, but there's they had to go through those years and had a difficult, very very difficult time.
But so many parallels to things we are experiencing
Yes,
right now and have been in both books, really.
right,
The
right.
Spanish flu, COVID, and starting in Russia and immigrating and
Yeah.
everything else. So, talk a little bit more about your writing process because that is something everyone in Renee's reading club wants to hear about.
So, yeah, my first book developed out of a lot of short stories. And I don't recommend that way to write a novel because it took me 9 years to write that novel. I wrote this book in a year and a half during COVID. And I did the research, the characters came to life, and I had this story of a family that felt very real to me. One of the most important things for me is for people to say, those characters are so real. They remind me of my aunt. This character reminds me of my Uncle Joe. And my family experienced something like this. And yes, this is just the way it was. So that's very important to me. And that there's a relevance and a truth to the characters. And I hope that when you read the book, and I hope you will read the book, you will agree and feel that the characters come to life.
You also write wonderful dialogue, which keeps, for me as a kid, the books that I was interested in as a kid had great dialogue because I could picture scenes in my mind, and now I've gotten to read the characters and bring them to life. So that I have certainly enjoyed that, and I think put a one in the chat or comment if you like books with dialogue or if you read How to Make a Life and you enjoyed those family dynamics that come out through the dialogue.
Yeah, I do like to write. I find that it helps the book go quickly. Everybody likes some description, but if it bogs down in overwriting,
Right.
I'm not happy with it. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, I'd like to hear some of the comments.
Yes,
Can you?
yes, I will. There's wonderful comments about my poppy would play cards every Sunday at the men's club in Manhattan, men only, and bring home a deck of cards when he came home for Sunday dinner. What a wonderful memory. And then the one about the fish swimming, about gefilte fish. I have to scroll back for that one. That was a great one. But my mother's maternal grandparents came from Hungary in the 1900s looking for a better life. It looks like that's a very common thing.
Yes.
My dad's maternal grandparents came from Romania. All of these immigrant families and that come to life that came through. Was there any in terms of discovering this, were there other people in the family that said, "Oh yeah, I knew about that and I never said anything," or how?
Yes, one of my cousins told me because I mentioned it to him, and he said, "Yeah, that his father used to whisper because this was a great shame." And his father was we used to call them married in. He was not one of the blood relatives. He was an in-law. So he told my cousin that there was a gangster in the family that was part of Murder Incorporated. I guess it was okay if it was, the shame, because there was huge, huge shame. And there still is. I was at a reading, I was doing the launch, and I asked about the gangsters, and a couple of people raised their hands. But when I was signing the books, this woman came and admitted to me that her father had been a chauffeur for a gangster.
Wow.
I said, "Oh, why didn't you raise your hand?" She said, "I was ashamed." So,
Right.
That there is shame to that. And I guess I understand it.
Yes, I guess so. Well,
Yeah.
of course, we want to remind you that this is a great holiday gift, and Hanukkah being just around the corner, as well as Christmas. Don't forget, you can. This is a great gift, and we will love to come to your book clubs. Florence
Right.
loves to come to book clubs. So do I, and we really are excited because the audio was just finally approved and released 2 days ago
Right.
for this book, Street Corner Dreams.
Oh.
Just out of curiosity, who likes audiobooks out there that maybe you prefer to read or sometimes do a little bit of both? Let us know. we have another comment about my sister and I about our incident, but only aunt and uncles were. Yeah, a lot of hush hush stuff in the families.
Right.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Family secrets, which is another big
Mm-hmm.
theme in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So the themes in this book, besides immigration, besides all of the hardships that immigrant families go through, is the question. I'm going to lay it out there,
Mm-hmm.
and you could think about it. Is, what do we owe the people who raise us?
Mm-hmm.
How much do we owe them?
Mm.
Do we have to give up our own hopes and dreams in order to make them whole, or should we not? So in this book, that question gets asked in many different ways over and over again. Certainly the first one I told you about already, which is Golda having to make the choice to give up her independence to take care of her sister's baby. But there are other ones that come up later. And I think we often get that in our, asked of us.
The other thing that I see as a theme in both books, and without giving anything away, is the theme of, and families do this, right? And I see people writing things about how we can hold grudges,
Yeah.
and then the theme of forgiveness and what comes from that navigating that pathway.
Right, right. And that does come absolutely in both books.
Yep.
It is.
We can't tell you.
Yes.
Anything more than that. Let's talk about the cover, because people and I personally loved both covers. So let's look at them. Let's look at them closely. This is the How to Make a Life.
How to Make a Life.
Beautiful, beautiful sort of photograph. And then this incredible cover, which is just dreamy and wispy, and tell us the story about how you got to choose this.
Okay, so I had a huge number of choices of covers that would be evocative of the timeline of this book. None of them really grabbed me. There were lots of tenements, and they weren't attractive. And then I saw this, and first of all, it reminded me of a painter that I love called Edward Hopper. I don't know, a lot of you probably know of him, and he does these very lonely pictures of people who seem to be alienated or worried or alone. And I saw this, and I just loved it, and also I loved it. Just really made me think of Golda and Ben. Then when I looked into it, I found out that the artist for this cover was not Edward Hopper, as I had thought maybe it was, but it was a man called Richard Tuchman, who was a photographer, who did a whole series of photographs in homage to Edward Hopper, and this was one of them. And so the designer of the book was able to get the rights to use it for the book cover. So it's not an Edward Hopper, but it is in homage to him. Mm-hmm. And I do love it. I think it's very evocative and really portrays the theme of the book.
Yeah, somebody wrote it really makes you think. And when she first showed it to me, I think you were deciding between a couple, but I don't know if I saw anything but this one. But I thought the same thing that Amy wrote, that it makes you want to know what's going on in that woman's mind, which makes me want to open the book and read it. Right. And just wonderful. Yes, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful covers of the books. And okay, something that we've been talking a lot about, and people always say about Florence's both books, you should turn them into a teleseries, you should turn them into a limited series or a film. How do you people feel about sequels? How do you feel about sequels?
Right.
Do you?
So that's a good question, because people often say to me, are you going to write a sequel? And I had no intention of writing a sequel. Certainly not to How to Make a Life. It went on for 100 years. I had no idea.
Right.
But this book, people may have been who've been reading it, the Street Corner Dreams, say, "Are you going? What happens?" And I'm not going to say what happened when it ended. So there was a fleeting second when I thought about it.
Okay.
So I'm sort of interested in what people think And
In
I
general, we
think in
wanna
general
know,
about
yeah.
sequels. Do you like them? Do you not like them? And because we're getting close to the 45 minutes, and I know that Renee is going to want to close this off. So let me know what you think in the chat about sequels. Do you enjoy them? Do you like to read them? Do you want, is that something that you're interested in?
And if people want to, this is something I'm just learning about. When you want to get a book at your local library, or if you want your local bookstore to get the book, you go in and you
ask
order
them,
it. You
yeah.
ask them, they'll order it. And obviously, the other normal big chain places, the Audible is available at actually it will be soon on Findaway and other places and through Libby, but right now Amazon for the Audible, or Audible for the Audible. And sometimes a book does need a sequel.
Is that what somebody said? Right?
I would say once you read this one, you maybe are going to want a sequel, But then do you ever feel like, oh, that you run that risk of, I didn't like the sequel as much as the
Yes,
first one,
that's
and that
right.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it probably, if the characters are still living inside of you or not.
Right. That's a good point.
Right.
That's
And
a
if
very
anybody
good
wants
point.
to reach Florence, obviously Facebook. I think FlorenceReissKraut.com. Am I right about that? I was
Yes,
going to put that in the
that's-
chat for everybody.
That is my website, and you can sign up. I would love it if you would sign up for my newsletter, and you can do that on my website. And you'll hear from me occasionally. I have stories I send out, blogs, and you might enjoy them. And in addition,
And we did a podcast, which we'll probably do another one, talking about the process of a writer working with a narrator. It's very interesting. If anyone wants to know more about that, you can certainly reach out to either one of us to talk
Right,
about that too.
right. So this has been really fun.
Yes, really fun. Tell your friends
And
buy
buy the book.
your holiday gifts. And this was really
was
really
wonderful.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
All right.
Okay, how do we do this now?
All right. Do we say goodbye now, Renee? Are you saying goodbye? We technically have 3 minutes. If anyone has burning questions, we could take a burning question.
Oh, Renee says this has been wonderful. I guess that's
I guess that's our
That's our-
hook. All right.
Thank you all very much
Mwah.
for coming.
Thank you very much.
Really.
Have a great, great, great day.